river, rather than putting it on the roads, polluting the atmosphere and destroying lives and ruining the transport system of London. Unfortunately, the first scheme in this, the new museum and learning centre, has just been given a contract to put all their materials on the road rather than on water. Will he look again at contracts that include transport on the river?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, the sponsor body have been looking at using the Thames, and I agree with my honourable friend that clearly anything we can take off the roads is a positive thing. As I've said, this work is currently paused, and maybe he would want to take it up with the Leader of the House to see exactly, to get some clarity on this issue in business questions.
Peter Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman has quite rightly told us in detail about what's being done, and it's really important about the environment and the roads. Is it possible what the work that has been done be published as soon as possible?
Yes, I would agree with the honourable gentleman that a lot of work has gone into this, and whatever the direction of travel is on this project, I think it's very important that we don't lose the valuable work that has already been done. And what I can certainly say, as having been involved in this for many years, that the people that have worked on the project have done incredible work, have worked incredibly hard, and whatever direction this actually goes, I think it is important that we value their work and we use their work to make sure that the scheme is improved and that we actually protect this place. Because at the end of the day, whatever individuals' views are on this project, it is about saving this palace.
Yeah.
Right, that now brings us on, nicely timed, to the urgent question. I call the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
To ask the Home Secretary to make a statement about refugees from Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for this opportunity to update the House on the government's humanitarian response to Putin's depraved war on Ukraine. As the House knows, the UK's humanitarian support for Ukraine has been developed following close consultation with their government and governments in the region. On the 4th of March, I launched the Ukraine Family Scheme. It applies to immediate and extended Ukrainian family members, and everyone eligible is granted 3 years leave to enter or remain. Today I want to set out further changes I'm making to the process to make it quicker and simpler. I have two overreaching obligations. First, to keep the British people safe. Second, to do all we can to help Ukrainians. No Home Secretary can take these decisions lightly, and I'm in daily contact with the intelligence and security agencies who are providing me with regular threat assessments. What happened in Salisbury showed what Putin is willing to do on our soil. It also demonstrated that a small number of people with evil intentions can wreak havoc on our streets. This morning, I received assurances which enable me to announce changes to the Ukrainian Family Scheme. Based on the new advice I have received, I am now in the position to announce that vital security checks will continue on all cases. From Tuesday, I can announce that Ukrainians with passports will no longer need to go to a visa application centre to give their biometrics before they come to the UK. Instead, once their application has been considered and appropriate checks completed, they will receive direct notification that they are eligible for the scheme and can come to the UK. In short, Ukrainians with passports will be able to get permission to come here fully online from wherever they are, and will be able to give their biometrics once in Britain. This will mean, Mr. Speaker, that visa application centres across Europe can focus their efforts on helping Ukrainians without passports. We have increased the capacity at those centres to over 13,000 appointments per week. And this streamlined approach will be operational as of Tuesday, the 15th of March, in order to make the relevant technology and IT changes. I will, Mr. Speaker, of course update the House if the security picture changes and if it becomes necessary to make further changes to protect our domestic homeland security. Threat assessments are always changing, and we will always keep our approach under review. In the meantime, Mr. Speaker, I once again salute the heroism of the Ukrainian people.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say to the Home Secretary, why does it always take being hauled into the House of Commons to make basic changes to help vulnerable people who are fleeing from the Ukraine? Maternity hospital was bombed yesterday. An attack on newborn babies and women giving birth. People are fleeing for their lives. And up to now, the response from the Home Office has been a total disgrace, bringing shame upon our country. We've had a 90-year-old Holocaust survivor left in makeshift accommodation in Poland, even though her granddaughter was struggling to get here. Mums with small kids told they can't get an appointment for weeks or having to queue for days to get biometrics in freezing weather in Rzeszów, only to be told they then have to travel 200 miles to Warsaw to pick up their visas. Now, it is welcome that she's now introducing the online approach that we know they tried different ways of doing for the Hong Kong visas, but why has it taken so long when she's had intelligence for weeks, if not months, that she needed to prepare for a Russian invasion of Ukraine? And why still, if we still got to wait until Tuesday for this new system to come in, what is to happen for everybody else in the meantime? Why is she not bringing in the armed forces? They've offered to help. We've had 1,000 troops on standby to provide humanitarian help for 2 weeks. So why not use them now to set up the emergency centres and to get people passported through as rapidly as possible and get them into the country? And what about the Ukrainian nurse here on a healthcare visa? Is she finally to be allowed to bring her elderly parents to the country, something we've asked for so long? And is this still just being restricted to those with family? Are they still going to have to fill in multiple online forms, or will she now say that all those who want to come to the UK, who have fled the fighting in Ukraine, can now come here without having to fill in loads of online forms or jump through a whole load of hoops? This has just been shameful. Making vulnerable people pushed from pillar to post in their hour of need. Week after week, we have seen this happen. It is deeply wrong to leave people in this terrible state. Our country is better than this. If she can't get this sorted out, frankly, she should hand the job over to somebody else who can.
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, as ever, I am delighted to be in the chamber, and in fact, Mr. Speaker, as you know, we were intending to give a statement this morning, so far from the opposition bench's comments, she should have some perspective to all of this, Mr. Speaker. I think, Mr. Speaker, if I may just respond to some of the points that the opposition party have made. Of course, it is the job of opposition just to attack the government rather than finding collective solutions. No, actually, rather than support the approach that the government is taking. I think first and foremost, no, absolutely, Mr. Speaker. I've always maintained that we will take a pragmatic and agile approach to our response. We are making important changes. She has asked why we are not making these changes immediately. They are subject to digital verification, and there is no comparison to BNO schemes whatsoever, because 90% of Ukrainians do not have chip passports, so they'd be excluded from any type of scheme and approach. Visa applications are important in terms of this process, and what we are seeing, and it is important that we're flexible in our response, and we have been, is that there are many Ukrainians that do not have documentation. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, I think this country and all governments, including probably a government that she once served in, will recognise that there was something known as the Windrush scandal, and it's important that everyone arrives in the UK has physical and digital records of their status here in the UK to ensure that they're accessible to schemes. They may hollow on the other side, but the process is absolutely vital in terms of the verification, notification and permission to travel, but importantly, to give people the status when they come to the United Kingdom, to have that right to work, the right to access and benefits, and also the digital verification of their status. That is absolutely right. And I think it is really important, Mr. Speaker, to remember again that yes, we have known this attack has been coming, but we have to work with the intelligence and security agencies. And no disrespect to the Honourable Lady, these checks and datas, biographical and warnings index, that is important security checks that can be done through this digital process. They have been verified by the intelligence and security services, and we have to work with them in particular. At a time of war and conflict, Mr. Speaker, I think it's really important that we work together. And if I can just reflect on many of the comments and observations that I've heard directly from the Ukrainian members of the community in this country, Mr. Speaker, who I've spent a great deal of time with this week, not just on their applications, how applications are processed, but actually how applications can be done both in the UK and the United Kingdom. There are not wades and wades of forms. There is a very clear application process for families to undertake. We've been working with the government. I would actually emphasise to those that want to listen to me in this House rather than talk over me. And it is through that engagement, Mr. Speaker, importantly, that many of these families have said that they actually want to see the country come together in the support, and also, rather than have misinformation about VAC appointments that originated from the opposition party, that we should stick with the factual information about the scheme, that everybody should work together in terms of not just promoting the scheme, but actually making sure that those that need our help are united in our collective approach in terms of how not only do we serve them, but support them in getting their family members over to the United Kingdom.
Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Of course, my right honourable friend is absolutely right that many of the people who are fleeing from this appalling murder mayhem, from war crimes and from breaches of the international rules of war, they want to remain as close as possible to the areas from which they have been driven, so that when this appalling catastrophe is over, they can return. But will she keep in touch with our European partners on both their practices and procedures, so that we help these desperate people who our constituents are rightly intent on us assisting, and to ensure that we are part of a coordinated and effective European response to this horrendous humanitarian crisis?
Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, both in his comments but also in terms of the coordinated approach that must be taken. My right honourable friend has also spoken very clearly about the response within the region, and it is very clear that families want to stay in the region. And on a daily basis, Mr. Speaker, I'm receiving calls from my counterparts, from Ministers of the Interior in the region, who are asking for aid to support those families that wish to stay in the region because they want to go back home. I think that's a really important point to make. The ambassadors in the region are saying this as well. And of course, my honourable friend has asked me about the EU in particular. I'm in constant contact with Commissioner Johansson, specifically in terms of how we can support the region, but also countries in the region and Ukrainian nationals in the region. And it is the need to have that coordinated response, which is so important, which also, Mr. Speaker, speaks to the point as to why the British government, through the whole government effort, are providing, yes, aid, financial aid and support, but also practical aid and equipment to many other countries in the region, on the Ukrainian border, that are actually asking for direct help and support from us.
SNP spokesperson Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we broadly welcome this U-turn by the government. It is a big step forward, but as we've heard, it didn't have to be this way. This war was foreseen, and the humanitarian crisis that has resulted from it was widely predicted. And I think, as I said yesterday, the government have been behind the public on this matter, and I believe that there's public pressure, probably a lot of Conservative MPs' inboxes, that has brought about this change, welcome though it is. Yesterday at the Home Affairs Committee, the Ukrainian ambassador was shocked to learn from my honourable friend from Cumbernauld that those Ukrainians currently here without permanent residence, that's students and workers, had absolutely no rights that would allow them to bring relatives to the UK under this bespoke system. The ambassador said he would raise it with the Home Secretary. So could the Home Secretary, did he raise it, and is that loophole covered with this? And what discussions has she had and will she have with the devolved administrations to ensuring this success?
I'd actually just like to thank the honourable gentleman for his comments and his questions and the approach and tone that he's taken. It is important that we work together. And in fact, the Minister for Immigration is in touch with the devolved administrations, and these are important discussions. We've been very clear about this from day one, about working collegiately and collectively in terms of our response. This cannot be done purely through central government, and we have to work across the country in terms of the support that is needed. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, if I may, I mean, just yesterday alone, I was in Manchester and Derby meeting with the Ukrainian diaspora community to listen to them about their needs in particular and how we can work, yes, centrally, but also with local authorities in terms of wider support. He's also asked some very important questions around students, for example, and there are many others who have their leave to stay in the country. They've had they can have their leave extended, and we are making that clear across the board in terms of 36 months. I've also been very, very clear in terms of our agility to respond back and also look at the approach to get their family members here as well. That is absolutely work that has been underway within the department. We are working on this right now, and I will come back, as I've said, Mr. Speaker, to update the House on this. And I am also in touch with the Ukrainian ambassador on a near daily basis, primarily because there are a range of cases that inevitably come up. Casework is complicated. Many members of Parliament have been using some of the caseworking facilities that have been provided to them directly in Portcullis House. As we find challenges, not everyone has documentations, not everyone has passports. We need to find ways in which we can work together to bring them here, and of course that is why everything is under review and why we have quite an agile response.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the announcement that the Home Secretary has made today. And I want to make a further suggestion, a practical one, I hope, that could alleviate the situation. The House of Commons Library says that there are 35,000 Ukrainian citizens here in the UK. And I know that they're sick to death with worry for their elderly mothers, babies, grandchildren, and so on. Would it not be possible for us to have a hub for them here in the UK where everything could be done from here and they could be given provisional visas to come into the country, and then we check the biometrics here?
Well, if I may, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable friend for her suggestion and comments. We're actually doing this across the country now. So yesterday I was in Manchester. We're working with the Ukrainian community groups there, and also in Derby, and in fact there is a whole network of the Ukrainian diaspora. We are providing them, they've actually asked us, not for a hub in London. We have one actually within the Ukrainian Social Club in London. We've stepped that up actually at the beginning of the week, post the weekend. But also we've been asked to have hubs within community centres, and we are establishing that, but we're working with the community to do that.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, and whilst I welcome the changes for the Ukrainian passport holders, many Ukrainians do not have passports, as the Home Secretary has just said. I want to ask her about TLSC, subcontracted by the Home Office to carry out biometric checks. The Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration told the Home Secretary that the TLSC contract was so hell-bent on making profit that its use posed a risk of reputational damage to the UK. Now, with Ukrainians fleeing for their lives and the chaos at the visa application centres with long waits and few appointments, can the Secretary of State tell me why this company is allowed to profit from the suffering and misery of Ukrainians by offering them, if they make additional payments, their cases will be expedited, they'll be given quicker appointments? Is that right?
No. Mr. Speaker, let me just share the information that I know about the contracted service with TLS. First and foremost, Mr. Speaker, that we have surge capacity, and I've said this several times in the House. We have at visa application centres, and that is a contractual process that we have, alongside working with Home Office staff in country, and further staff have been sent out. But she's asked specifically about the contractual arrangements with TLS. Our priority has been to surge their staff in country to create more appointments, and we have surged appointments. There have been 6,000 appointments available this week. As of Tuesday the 15th, there'll be 13,000 appointments with people that don't have documentation and passports. We can prioritise those without documentation and passports. Those with passports can use the digital service that will be set up from Tuesday or will go live. But I will come back to her as Chair of the Select Committee On the contractual details, primarily because obviously these contractual details are organised through the departments, and there is a procurement process that goes on, so I will absolutely write back to her on specifics. But let me just finally just make one other point. With regards to Ukrainian individuals, family nationals, Ukrainian nationals coming to the United Kingdom to be reunited with their families, this is a free service. There are no charges in place whatsoever.
I welcome the measures announced today, which are coming in next Tuesday, but could she not today suspend the carrier liability duty for Ukrainian passport holders presenting at Krakow or Warsaw airports to come to the UK to have the checks done in a secure setting here and be granted at least a visitor's visa, or remove Ukraine from the list of restricted countries so they could come here in the same way as an American tourist and be granted a visitor's visa subject to the checks in a secure setting? Am I wrong?
No, well, look, I thank my honourable friend, and as ever, he is making practical suggestions in terms of what we can do. I'm afraid those checks cannot be suspended, and there has been work already across government looking at, particularly with the carrier liability aspect as well. It's the electronic authorisation to travel that we are speeding up through this process, through this digital system, so that once the individual receives the authorisation, they can go straight to a port and they can show that they have the authorisation to travel, and then they can board a plane or train to get to the United Kingdom. We cannot make any other travel changes on that basis because of the wider implications that has with other carriers.
Mr. Bryan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, I think the whole of the House just wants the government to be and the UK to be as generous as possible and as unbureaucratic as is possible. If that's where we're getting to, we're pleased. But the thing that still nags away at me is, as I understand it, and as we were told in the Foreign Affairs Committee, the government has known since October or November of last year that Putin either wanted or intended to do this. So on so many levels, we've been really running to catch up. And I think a lot of us are asking, why didn't we know that we needed to put all of this in place like 2 months ago? And if I might just, I want Putin to be in a court of law. The International Criminal Court can't just judge a leader on the basis of initiating a war of aggression. Will she work to change that law?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments, and he is right. Of course, we've known that this attack was absolutely planned. What we are finding, though, and the schemes that we have obviously have been developed with the governments within the region. I must emphasise that, Mr. Speaker. Currently, right now, various countries within the region are asking for different requirements from the Home Office in terms of how we undertake our checks, how we process individuals, and we are trying to simplify this so that it just makes it easier across the board. So if I may, Mr. Speaker, in Poland last week, the Polish government asked us, please do not process people near the border or within the close proximity of the border, please use your visa application centres. The Hungarian government have asked us for a totally different approach and asked us for liaison officers on the ground. The Romanian government are asking us to come to the border. So we have deliberately chosen to use the facilities of the visa application centres to give the certainty and consistency in approach. Clearly, our objective has been throughout to try and streamline this, and the digital piece is challenging. It is not straightforward. We do have to change and change our codes, our systems, our structures, but recognise that many Ukrainians do not even have electronic passports. Passport and travel documentation is not consistent around the world. Hence the comment I made earlier on about Chip Checker and the B&O scheme, where 97,000 visas have been granted. On the honourable gentleman's point about President Putin and war crimes, I would just like to assure the House there is some very significant work that's taken place in this area, actually, across government, but also with policing and the CPS. I'm sure my colleagues in government will, and of course, exactly that, laws do need to change. With that, we will look at every single aspect in terms of prosecutions and how we can absolutely ensure that we all achieve the right outcome.
Steve Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful for what my right honourable friend has said about the number of appointments that there will be, and I'm very grateful to Visa Application Centre staff for working so hard. But I understand that the Warsaw Centre is closing at 5 p.m. and at weekends. Could she possibly do something to extend opening hours?
No, my honourable friend has made a very, very important point. This is because of labour laws in Poland, and there have been extensive discussions via government, Foreign Office, Home Office, in terms of getting the extensions. We would love them to be working much longer hours. Believe you me, we've been pursuing this, including the weekends. As I've said, every country and region has a different response and different laws that we have to respect and work with, and we are absolutely doing everything we possibly can to get those extensions.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think I've ever seen my Edinburgh South West constituents more angry than they are this week about what the government have done or not done so far on this. Mr. Speaker, the fictional Prime Minister Jim Hacker once said that it was important for the government not to look heartless and feeble at the same time. But I'm afraid that's what they have done for the last week. So I welcome this U-turn. But will the Home Secretary also take the opportunity to apologise to the Ukrainian refugees whose suffering has been needlessly exacerbated by the Home Office's ineptitude? And will she apologise to many of my constituents who have Ukrainian relatives whose suffering has been exacerbated by her department's ineptitude?
If I may, first of all, to correct the Honourable Lady, since I've become Home Secretary, we've welcomed to the United Kingdom 20,000 Afghanistan refugees and 97,000 Hong Kongers. Over the last 2 years, if I may say, and these numbers are completely unprecedented, and I'll take no lectures from her about heartlessness, particularly, Mr. Speaker, in light of the lack of take-up of the dispersal scheme for those people that need housing that come to the United Kingdom. So, you know, for those fleeing persecution, I would absolutely say that she and her government need to look at themselves. I make the point as well, Mr. Speaker, if I may. It is by working with the Ukrainian community and the diaspora. She's already heard me say to the House a few times now about the work that we're doing directly with them to help their family members come over. And I think it would be good to recognise, actually, that we achieve the right outcomes, not just by working together, but actually giving them the support in terms of how the application process can be made, and we are doing that in government, to correct her. We have done it to date. We have indeed, and I'm sorry if she's not been able to use many of the facilities that we have made available to her constituents and herself to actually make these cases come through, Mr. Speaker.
Robert Butland.
Speaker, I welcome my right honourable friend's announcement today, and she knows that I and others have been pushing for tech and biometrics to be used more constructively. But with regard to the repurposing of officials and their movement to the front line, not just from within the Home Office, but from across government, will she work with the excellent new Refugees Minister to ensure that we can get that real sense of coordination and urgency here? As Russia leaves the Council of Europe and denounces the European Convention of Human Rights, the slide into tyranny continues. This is a crisis that will not wait.
Well, my friend is absolutely right, and we are blessed, I think, with the appointment of our noble friend in the other place as Refugee Minister, because this is about coordination. This is about national coordination and not about one department or another department. This is a whole of government effort, Mr. Speaker, a phrase that I've used several times in this House. And of course, if I may, Mr. Speaker, the Refugee Minister will of course be overseeing much of the community sponsorship scheme, which will come in due course, and of course there'll be further announcements about that scheme too.
Green. Mr. Speaker, can the Home Secretary just confirm that for Ukrainians with dual nationality, for example Ukrainian and Romanian nationality, that they will nonetheless be able to come to the UK under the family scheme?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right on that, and of course we are seeing many dual nationals come forward, and that is why we are absolutely trying to streamline the system to make it easier for people to apply, for them to apply. The other point to make, Mr. Speaker, about applications, these applications can be made in country. They can be made in Ukraine, which again will speed up their ability to come to the United Kingdom.
Laura Trott.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for the announcements today, which will directly benefit the families of my constituents. Can I ask a point of clarification? If a Ukrainian has a Ukrainian ID card rather than the passport, can they apply entirely online?
No. Mr. Speaker, this will be passports only for all the security checks that can be taken through passport data. And this is part of the problem, or the wider challenge that we've had in terms of documentation. These types of cases will need to go to the VACs, but as I've said, we've just increased the capacity to over 13,000 appointments. And of course, if there are any other issues, we can also pick up casework directly.
We're a Hobbs.
Speaker, it is disappointing that she needs to be dragged here to make the process simpler and more quick. And a lot of the people in this country will not understand why it's so complicated. Now, she has already responded to the honourable member from East Worthing why we can't just let people come here and have the checks done here, as we do for millions of visitors from non-visa countries. So will she at least commit to looking into whether this is possible? Because Ukrainians who come and flee war have gone through days and weeks of trauma and exhaustion, and they deserve to be treated better.
Speaker, if I may, I've always made it abundantly clear in the House that all our approach is always under review. It's under review for a range of issues. Situation changes, security threat level changes as well. She's just asked, why don't we, can't we just let people through? There's a range of advice that I have to consider. And it is by considering all advice and also looking at the approach that we can take. My priority has been to streamline the approach. We do not want, it is clearly not appropriate to keep sending people that do not necessarily need to go to visa application centres to go to visa application centres. We can now prioritise those that are more vulnerable and don't have documentation, and we want to focus on those individuals. I think the final point to make, Mr. Speaker, as well, is absolutely we as a country are not only generous in our approach to people fleeing persecution. The government's approach has always been in terms of safe routes, legal routes, Afghan refugees, BNO nationals that have come to the UK. This has been at the heart of the government's work. And for every single crisis that takes place in the world, there is no single solution. We have to develop bespoke solutions, and that is what we have done.
Meg Elliott. Dave Meg Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as one of the top 6 customers of the Home Office on immigration issues, this situation just underlines the chaos in the Home Office's immigration system, that it's really struggling to keep up with the basics, and then when dealing with this surge has understandably crumbled under the pressure. But I'm concerned that while we've been waiting all of these days, we know there are security checks that need to take place. But what security risk is there of 90-year-old women, of people in their 60s, of mothers and small children? And has she not given some thought to progressing them through faster and doing more checks here in the UK?
The answer is yes, and that's exactly what we have been doing.
Mark Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, can I welcome what the Home Secretary said this morning, combining security with a generous approach. Both of those are essential and must be delivered. In my experience of the Home Office, officials in the Home Office who are focused on protecting our country respond well to clear and decisive leadership. So can I just check so that it's clear, does the Home Secretary retain overall responsibility for the whole of our refugee policy, including the humanitarian sponsorship scheme, so that people know where the buck stops? And when does she expect to be able to come to the House to set out further details?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right, and he will be too familiar, it's fair to say, with the various processes around immigration, checks, digitalisation, security, the wide considerations that have to be made constantly. In terms of wider refugee policy, this is a whole-of-government effort. So parts of this, in particular the community sponsorship route, as I announced in the House last week, will be led by Deluxe. They will be leading on that primarily because of the local authority engagement, the safeguarding that's required. There'll be further announcements, Mr. Speaker, on this, but the Refugee Minister in particular will be split between both departments to assist with the coordination effort that is required. And I know my right honourable friend will be so familiar actually with the Vulnerable Syrian Refugee Scheme and how that was created. We are effectively trying to build upon some of the previous models that have worked successfully in government.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I commend my right honourable friend for the calm and collected manner in which she's presented this statement and for the manner in which she has dealt with the really serious and complicated problems that this represents. And furthermore, to commend also members from both sides of the House who have shown conspicuous interest in trying to get together over this subject rather than just to produce carping criticisms.
thank my honourable friend for his comments and his acknowledgement of the very difficult work, of course, as a country. Our priority is absolutely to bring people over from the Ukraine at their time of desperate need and give them the protection that they need as well. But as I said, Mr. Speaker, every crisis requires a bespoke response, and that is what this government has been working on.
Chairman.
Speaker, the Home Secretary is doing a difficult job at this stressful time with this horrible war that Putin's unleashed against these innocent people. But can I give one tiny bit of advice that we really want to keep this cross-party support for the people in Ukraine. But will she remember that sometimes her tone is a bit aggressive? And she did lose some of us on this side when she seemed to suggest we couldn't be trusted with security information. And also, we were a bit disappointed when she just got her facts wrong about what was happening in Calais.
No, if I may, Mr. Speaker, I acknowledge the honourable gentleman's comments, and I think it is important, actually, that as a country and in this House in particular, we unite against Putin and what Putin is doing. We must never lose sight of what President Putin is doing to Ukraine, the people of Ukraine, and that is something I think this entire House, particularly this week, should absolutely get behind.
Priti Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for the Home Secretary for her approach. Please forgive me, but I didn't hear correctly whether it was 13,000 appointments per day or per week. And she mentioned many of the countries that we've got our visa centres in, but the small country of Moldova, which is not in the EU, has had a disproportionate number of people come there. Have we beefed up that visa application centre?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. First of all, these are applications at the VAC centres in the region, the 13,000 next week. Primarily for, once we launch the digital approach, this will mean that those appointments are for those individuals that are vulnerable without documentation who will need our help to get their status, and we'll need to do much more work with them. Secondly, on Moldova, I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, in fact, it was the EU Commissioner, Commissioner Johansson, who I spoke to on Monday, and she called me specifically about assistance for Moldova and the fact that they are having a very challenging time, not just in number of refugees, but at their borders. They are finding a number of third country nationals that are now presenting, trying to present themselves as Ukrainians when in fact they are not. And of course they've got border security problems as well, and we have been specifically asked to provide assistance with security equipment and help to stop weapons from coming into the country. I've also spoken to the Minister of Interior there this week. There is a lot of work directly taking place to support the government as they also support people fleeing the Ukraine.
Savile Roberts.
My constituent, Gareth Roberts of Trawsfynydd, is presently travelling to the Slovakia border with his wife Natasha to meet her daughter and granddaughter. Gareth is a fluent Russian and Ukrainian speaker, and he is well able to help the family to make the digital applications. But he tells me that you can only make the applications in English, and that this will directly affect many vulnerable Ukrainian applicants. Will she confirm to me that it will be possible in future to make these applications in Ukrainian, and better still, will she waive all these restrictive visa requirements?
Mr. Speaker, the applications are in English because the checks have to be done in the UK in particular by British people. We are, however, Mr. Speaker, there is work taking place to see what we can do, particularly, primarily because we are bringing in Ukrainian and Russian speakers to help us not just with translations, but to see what more we can do to deal with getting forms in the right language, but also having more staff in our centres as well, working directly with the Ukrainian community, and that equally applies in the UK through the hubs that we are creating.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I warmly welcome today's announcement, which I and other colleagues have been calling for. As my right honourable friend knows after the visit at the weekend, which I'd like to thank her for, the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain is headquartered in my constituency. And I would ask my right honourable friend, given the amount of correspondence and issues that they are having put into them, if she would consider a direct link for them into the Home Office.
Mr. Speaker, I do want to just give my thanks as well to the Centre for everything they've been doing. It was very humbling actually to spend so much time with them on Sunday. It really was. But again, to understand from them issues, barriers and challenges. And of course, I've said from day one, Mr. Speaker, we work with the community. We have to ensure that everything we do in our approach works for them. We are providing direct help. We are setting up a hub specifically in the centre for the community. I was quite struck actually by some of the complexities that we have seen, particularly with elderly family members and how they can come to the United Kingdom. The hub in the Honourable Lady's constituency is one that will be replicated with some of the other locations that I referred to earlier on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituent's Ukrainian wife, Ludmila Florence, was turned away from the UK visa office in Warsaw, being told she had to book an appointment and make her application online. The UK immigration website repeatedly stated, "Sorry, there is currently a problem with the service. Please try again later." She eventually now has an appointment, but not until the 17th of March. What is Ludmila supposed to do whilst the Home Secretary is getting her act together?
Well, if the Honourable Lady had listened to my statement earlier on, she would absolutely have heard what the process is. In fact, the application can be done even from Tuesday, digitally. But if she would like to present me with the case, I'd be very happy straight after this question. Well, we do have the hub in Portcullis House, which actually has been working through cases. I don't know if the Honourable Lady has been using this, but if she has difficulty with that, then she's very welcome to give me the case straight after the EQ, and I'll make the calls myself directly.
Richard Fuller.
I was shocked to hear the Labour front bench imply that they would throw away or downplay essential security checks in their mad dash to be seen to be doing something. I know our Home Secretary will stand firm on our borders. But will my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, also use this opportunity to thank the many thousands of families around this country who have stepped forward to say that they wish to give support to Ukrainian families, and will she tell them she'll work...
Order. I think we need to check the Hansard after. It's not quite how I remembered it, to be quite honest. And I don't want to get into a slanging match. We need to be correct on the information that we challenge. So please, I think afterwards, if we were to check it, it might be a much easier way. Richard Fuller, if you want to continue.
I'm grateful, Mr. If I got that wrong, I do apologise to the Shadow Home Secretary if I did get that incorrect. My point was the balance that the Home Secretary has herself. Will she use this opportunity to thank the many thousands of British families who have stepped forward? They wish to help Ukrainian families, that she will work night and day to enable them to fulfil their generosity.
Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right in everything that he said. There's no question about that whatsoever. With regards to the Ukrainian community across the United Kingdom, they've been absolutely extraordinary. They really have. In really their resolve, in particular, their fortitude at a very, very difficult time to provide much needed support and resource, but importantly, to support people coming over to the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to preempt any further statements on community support, primarily because there is a scheme in government that is under development. But many members of the community have been shaping that scheme and how that help can also be given.
Maureen Fellows.
Mr. Speaker, I spoke about my constituent this week in this place. Yesterday he made it to Warsaw with his Ukrainian wife and her daughters to be told that he might get an appointment on the 18th of March, but they weren't sure because the systems were down and they'd have to wait till they came back up to check that that was possible. I don't think that anything you've said today, Home Secretary, has helped forward my constituent because he's been told to apply yet again. The systems aren't working. The only things working, and I've seen the women, and they are all women, they were mainly women down in Portcullis House working their butts off to try and help. but the systems don't work. Online applications are going to make it even worse.
Here.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, but if I may, our systems have been working, they are working. I can't comment on her particular case and the generalities that she's spoken about, but as I've said, I will happily take it away and look at it directly, because I cannot respond to general statements about systems not working when there are thousands of applications on a daily basis being made.
Agreed.
I welcome the extra flexibility that my right honourable friend has introduced into the system, particularly the capacity to take biometrics in this country, which she will know many of us have been calling for. Can she clear up, are these new arrangements simply for those coming on the family route, or do they apply more generally? And if the former, can she give some kind of indication as to when we're going to hear more about the humanitarian sponsorship route?
Mr. Speaker, if I may, Mr. Speaker, the simplifications are to the family scheme, so it is the same scheme, but we are simplifying the process and digitalising it. And with regards, I can't preempt the humanitarian scheme, which is being led by Deluxe, but there will be statements. There will be statements. I can't say when, because the department are working on the details of the scheme.
The agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I raise the case of Artur Nadiev, a Ukrainian PhD student at the University of Nottingham? Artur has encountered confusion and difficulties applying for a UK student visa. He's currently in Munich. And on the 5th of March, UKVI advised that he needs to take a TB test to obtain a visa, even though Home Office updated rules for Ukrainian citizens travelling to the UK state that TB tests have been waived. So can she clarify whether Artur can now obtain his visa and come to the UK without needing to travel to a third country in order to obtain a TB test?
Absolutely correct, Mr. Speaker.
Scott Benton.
This country has a proud history of providing sanctuary to those fleeing for their lives, and I welcome the various routes we've made available to those displaced from Ukraine. There will always be those who seek to exploit this country's generosity for more malicious aims. And so, will my right honourable friend confirm that the integrity of the appropriate security checks will not be compromised whilst we are speeding up the visa process?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and this has been absolutely verified through the agencies and departments that we work with.
Mr. Speaker, with one of the largest Ukrainian populations in the country in Westminster, I welcome this late change of heart by the government, and I hope that it will work considerably more effectively than the Afghan scheme did. But can I just seek a clarification on the issue of work visas? Does this scheme mean that those who are here on work visas will be able to bring, for example, dependent relatives?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said earlier on, we are absolutely looking at the whole categories, everyone that, Ukrainians on work visas, even student visas as well, and how we can make that happen.
Jeremy Hunt.
Speaker, can I welcome today's announcement and thank the Home Secretary for listening to the House, and ask her about my constituent Larry Sullivan, who owns a technology business in Russia. He has got some very able young software engineers desperate to get here. They would make a big contribution to the UK economy. They're fanatically against Putin's war of aggression. Is there a route for them to come here before Putin slams the door shut?
If I may, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to come back to the right honourable gentleman and discuss that with him, because there will be ways.
Live bets.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I asked the Home Secretary last week about the arrangements for refugees when they come here. Many of them will need places for their children in schools, they'll need mental health support, and under both schemes, many will want accommodation. Can the Home Secretary explain what the arrangements are? She said DLUC are responsible for the community sponsorship scheme for these arrangements, but is the Home Office then responsible for people under the family scheme? Now, we asked the Permanent Secretary at Select Committee on Monday, the DLUC Permanent Secretary, and he confirmed that currently there aren't any arrangements in place, none had been agreed, and he couldn't give a timetable when they would be agreed. So shan't she update the House today on what the arrangements are under both schemes, or will the DLUC Secretary of State come to this House in the near future and update us?
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Speaker. The right honourable gentleman is absolutely right. This is led by DLUC, the sponsorship route, and of course with sponsorship, As we discussed last week, I think, in the House, Mr. Speaker, accommodation will be a vital part, and also the engagement with local authorities. I cannot preempt the work of DLUC, but further statements will be made on this. And the Honourable Gentleman has also spoken about the family scheme as well. The community and family members are absolutely working together on that. But there is no doubt, and we should be very clear about this, access to public funds and public services are absolutely guaranteed within the family route, which is why collectively across government, and this is a government effort, it isn't about one department versus another, although some will lead on various details, we are working with DLUC, but also with the DAs in particular, to give them the support they need when more members of the Ukrainian community come over to be reunited with their family.
Tom Randall.
I welcome today's announcement, which I'm sure will be welcomed by the many Gedling residents who also want a generous approach. My right honourable friend has spoken about the processing centres in Poland, but I wondered whether she could update us on the processing of visas for those refugees coming
of the economic crime bill will come before us, such as the measures on reforming Companies House, which have been referred to. It cannot wait, Mr. Speaker, until the next session. We on this side of the House, we will work with him and his colleagues to make sure that any such bill progresses speedily, as we have done this week. So could he give us more information on that? Mr. Speaker, Tuesday was International Women's Day. And the government's own survey showed that just 16% of small business employers and only 1 in 3 entrepreneurs are women. Women clearly hold the key to our economic recovery, and the data bears this out when we look at those companies which do have good gender diversity. As we come out of the pandemic, it's so important. So could the Leader of the House ask the Business Secretary to set out what steps he is taking to increase the number of women in business at all levels? During the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, social care staff were one of the groups at the front line of our fight against COVID, but vacancies currently at an all-time high, leading to immense pressures for those already working in the sector. And it's been brought to my attention that organisations in Derby, for instance Disability Direct, are showing their appreciation for their hard work and commemorating those who sadly lost their lives this weekend. So could the Leader of the House join me in praising social care staff in Derby and also, of course, social care staff across the country? Mr. Speaker, as much as this government tries, we cannot ignore the worsening cost of living crisis. At a time of rocketing bills and stagnating wages that predate the Ukraine crisis, the Conservatives are choosing to increase national insurance, not back down, on working people and businesses at the worst possible time, which will hit 27 million workers. It leaves other forms of income, such as the buying and selling of property or dealing stocks and shares, untouched. Now, our Opposition Day motion this week, scrapping the planned rise, was agreed by the House. So could the Leader of the House confirm that the Chancellor will not be pushing ahead with this disastrous Tory tax rise? And Mr. Speaker, it is also time for the government to look again at Labour's proposal for a one-off windfall tax on oil and gas. This would cut household energy bills by up to £600. It would enable the Warm Homes discount scheme to be expanded. It would help those who need it most, including the nearly 13,000 households in the Right Honourable Gentleman's own constituency, who would save up to £600 off their bills. So could the Leader of the House explain why his government is forcing working people, including his own constituents, to pay the price for over a decade of government dither, delay and incompetence? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
To the House.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for a number of questions. So let's start with Ukraine and sanctions. And I think she is right to draw attention not only to the President of Ukraine appearing on Tuesday, which was a momentous occasion, but the barbaric actions of the Putin regime yesterday, I think, struck a new barbarity and new depths. Attacking a maternity hospital cannot even be comprehended in a civil society, and we should be under no illusion that this House is united in opposing Putin and his regime. We will not forget what they are doing, and they will be held to account in a war crimes court at some point in the future. And all of those people who are acting on behalf of President Putin in conducting these actions should be under no illusion that they will not escape justice either, and we are united as a House of Commons in delivering that. She asked about Part 2 of the Economic Crime Bill, and that is, of course, coming very soon. It will be in the next session, which is not very far away. And certainly the next session will be upon us very soon and will be announced in the usual way from this dispatch box. And business. Oh, the honourable gentleman from a secondary position tempts me to speculate, but I think the new session will be announced in the usual way, and the Economic Crime Bill will be a very key part of that and will be brought forward as rapidly as possible.